All righty. Well, thanks for being here. My name is Paul Mitchell. I'm the owner of Redistricting Partners, and we're a firm that does redistricting, racially polarized voting analysis, conversion under the California Voting Rights Act of agencies from at-large to districts. And we do it all over the state. We've worked with over 100 agencies in California. We're also the demographers for the state of New York, the city of New York. We've worked in 14 different states, including Alaska. If anybody wants to ask Alaska redistricting questions, I'm your guy. And I'm going to go through some basics about the process. I'm going to talk about the way submissions are done and go over kind of where to go from here. So first off, the California Voting Rights Act. When people hear that, they think of like the broader Federal Voting Rights Act, and they think, oh, this probably applies to like all kinds of issues, where polling places are, how ballots are designed, and everything like that. But in fact, the California Voting Rights Act is really narrowly tailored to one thing, and that is agencies that are in at-large elections. So one election cycle, maybe you elect 3 from the whole agency boundaries, and the other election, maybe you elect 2, and that's how you comprise a 4-person or a 5-person board. Switching from that kind of a system to one in which you have 5 geographic areas, and each geographic area elects their one representative. So you have to live in that area, and only the voters in that area vote for their trustee. So the state law says you can't have these at-large elections if you have racially polarized voting. And throughout California, in most parts of the state, you can, using the same statistical tools that are used in court cases, find racially polarized voting where, say, the Latino population, the Black population, the Asian population, or even, I grew up in Glendale, the Armenian population, other ethnic groups show patterns of voting for candidates and issues in a way that is what is called polarized. I mean, they have different voter preferences than the majority or white voters. When we draw districts under the California Voting Rights Act, we have to look also at the new state the Fair Maps Act, which has certain criteria for how districts get drawn. These criteria weren't just kind of picked out of a hat randomly. A lot of these criteria are firm federal law around voting rights and how districting is done, such as districts need to be equally sized. And when we get into the map drawing process, that's going to be one of the most frustrating parts of this process sometimes, is that you say, well, I think the perfect district would go right around this area and up this one street and so on, and you draw it, and you think that looks like a good district to me, and then you find out that it's nowhere near 1/5 the size of the district in terms of total population. And so you have to meet that rule as you're drawing other criteria. Districts need to be contiguous, meaning that they need to be whole parts. You can't have a district kind of like happen over here and then like skip a few city blocks and then start up again over somewhere else. Districts need to maintain communities of interest, and I'll talk more about that, what those are. They also should be easily identifiable and understandable to voters. And so what that means, it's kind of the eyeball test, that somebody from one of the residents or somebody from the community should be able to see a districting map and say, oh, that makes sense. Like, I can see that major road, or, you know, I understand why the districts are drawn that way. And then finally, districts should be compact. And compact doesn't mean small. It really means that they're, you know, whole pieces more circular and square than they are squiggly lines. There's a technical language around how compactness works in California, which roughly means that if you have 2 neighboring communities, they should probably be drawn in together. You shouldn't like skip a neighboring community to like dance around to go get some far away population. You should draw districts with nearby populations together in the same seats. Now, community of interest is a term of art in redistricting. And what it really means is a group of people, residents, voters, people who have issues before the school board in this case, that are unique and have interests before the board and can be affected by the policies of the board. So, you know, as an example, it could be just people who share a certain policy concern, like people who want to make sure that there's more ESL instruction or more after school or more tutoring or whatever. It could also be people who have concerns about, you know, things like public safety, environmental issues, housing issues, all kinds of things. What's really key about this process of determining communities of interest is the things that we don't include as a community of interest. Political parties is not a community of interest. If somebody comes into the room and says, hey, I'm the president of the College of Libertarians and we want a district that keeps all the libertarians in the same district, that doesn't qualify. So it has to be, you know, issue-based or community-based, not just political. Also does not include incumbents or candidates. If somebody comes up and says, I want this district drawn so it goes here around my house because I want to run for school board in that district, that's not a legitimate criteria. We can't do that. Same thing with incumbents. We can't have somebody say, well, this district would have 3 of the incumbents in the same district, so we can't have that. So we can't draw districts based on where incumbents live. Some different types of communities of interest that have been discussed already in this process include the attendance areas. Now, attendance areas are interesting because as a community, they all might share a concern about a specific campus, right? They might have issues at their campus or the campus that's, you know, where their kids attend or whatever, that are unique to them and different than in a neighboring attendance area. So that makes sense. It also makes sense that if you want to make districts that are easily understood by voters, a lot of voters might know what attendance area they're in, and it might make sense for them to be electing somebody who represents the area of their high school, not representing somebody who represents in a high school somewhere else. So they're great kind of default community of interest boundaries. Another community of interest, and this is in line with the purposes of the California Voting Rights Act, would be the minority populations, the protected classes in the area. And in this district, you have 2 predominant protected classes, Asians and Latinos. And these maps here show where the Asian and Latino populations are. And it's important to note that the district, in terms of total population, taken from the annual census, counting everybody, is 46% Asian and 35% Latino, based on the decennial census. However, redistricting has a lot of weird rules. And when we talk about the ethnic population in districts, for the purposes of elections, the federal law requires us to look at the population of eligible voters. And for that, we look at a data set called the citizen voting age population. And in that calculation, the district is 47% Asian by citizen voting age population and 29% Latino by citizen voting age population. So that's important to note. When we look at the Latino population, you can see one main core kind of geographically in the center of the district, this red area. Then you can also see to the south of that some other pockets of darker red where you have high Latino citizen voting age population. When we look at the Asian population, it's kind of the inverse of that a little bit. So you have a northern area with high density of Asian population, and then south of that Latino community, you have a lot of area with high Asian population. That southernmost area doesn't have a lot of Latino or Asian population, so that's a wider area, as well as kind of the eastern, a lot of that is relatively unpopulated, but that doesn't have a lot of density of Asian Latinos. Now, at the last meeting, somebody came up and said, what about identifying where the Vietnamese and Chinese and Filipino communities are specifically? Because the Asian population, especially in this part of the state, can sometimes vote differently by Asian nationalities. So we look at a different data set, the American Community Survey data, and for the purposes of identifying where you have the densest pockets of these different nationalities, we looked at language. So the census has data on primary language spoken in a household. And so when we look at that, we have here, this is Vietnamese and Mandarin or Cantonese. Those are combined as one. And then we have Spanish and Tagalog. So I'm going to show the zoomed in maps of this. The Vietnamese population, you can see, remember where that Latino population was? And to the south of that, there was a larger, denser Asian population. It looks as though that area is most heavily Vietnamese. When we look at the Cantonese Mandarin speaking, so the Chinese population, you see the greatest density there to the north. When we look at the Tagalog population, so the Filipino population, again, mostly in the northern area. And then when we look at the Spanish population, it looks exactly like that map we looked at earlier with the Spanish population, with the Latino population. So mental picture of these nationalities is going to be interesting kind of lock in, because when we get to draft maps or looking at those maps or looking in districtor, you're going to see a lot of maps create a majority minority Latino district right here where it's most heavily Spanish speaking, and then creates a different northern Asian majority minority district that's primarily Chinese, and then a kind of mid-southern majority minority Asian district, which is primarily Vietnamese. So that's an interesting aspect of this line drawing process. The other thing that was asked about at the last meeting was socioeconomic factors. And you could say, well, why does that matter? Why does somebody's economic status matter, or whether they're a renter or homeowner? Well, it matters because some of those communities might have different issues before the school district than a more affluent community. A more affluent community might be asking about tutoring services, and a more lower income community might be asking more about after school programs or access to, other services that their community needs. And so the needs of those areas might be slightly different, and when they're going to the school board. And so when we look at these kind of proxies for income that we have in the census data, one is kind of renter occupied map. And you can see that in the northern and western portions of the district more so than in the eastern. Not a perfect alignment to kind of the districts that we've seen so far, but the data is there to show a difference in the density of renter versus owner occupied. And then with median income, this shows the darker lines as the higher income. So again, you see lighter shaded again on that western side, and then higher income more on the eastern side. So we have public map submissions, and on the website, we have draft maps A, B, and C, along with map submissions that have been done by the public, and hopefully we'll get some more tonight. And all those map submissions that we get tonight will be posted on the website as well as draft maps by the public. When we drew these draft maps, and I'm going to go through them here at the end, just so you get a look at them. When we drew these draft maps, all three of them came from public submissions. So we took a publicly submitted map, we kind of touched it up to make sure it was, every census block was assigned, and maybe do some population adjustments and so on, and created them to be the draft maps for the board to consider. So the way to get involved, if you're watching this at home and here in the room, we'll be doing this online as soon as I put the microphone down, we'll get everybody a chance to go play around. This is the link at the bottom here to get to the districting map tool. The map tool is really kind of easy to do. One of my rules is my mom knows how to use it, right? She's not a techie person, but she goes on this thing and it's super easy for her to do. And we've seen had a lot of great experience with people who don't consider themselves to be a GIS nerd or even know what GIS means, who can go in here and draw maps. So it's a lot of fun. You're going to see when you get in this tool, and I'll do a little demo of it here before I get done, that you're going to have the ability to overlay on the map those attendance areas. So if you say, like, I really want to look at those attendance areas, you can do that and paint your districts kind of like following those attendance area boundaries. You can also toggle off and on, and I have it highlighted here where you can do it. You can toggle off and on the ethnic populations based on the census data. And as you might guess, looking at this just from having seen the presentation so far, that is a map where the darker areas are more heavily Latino. And when you go in there, you just get to paint. It's like with a paintbrush. And as you paint the area, you'll see on the right-hand side, these bars start to move with the growth of the population. The goal is to make all these bars really almost perfectly sized. So ideal population of each district. The ideal population of each district is around 107,000. And so we're going to have districts that might be, one might be 95,000 and another one might be 105,000, something like that, but they're still going to kind of be centering around that, 107,000 median size. Let me show you real quickly what these draft maps look like. This is draft map A based on public submission. And one unique thing about all of these draft maps is they each have a Latino majority minority district, which you can see in this one is that yellow district number 1. As you can see, thinking about that map that we saw with the Spanish language population, there was the central and then kind of a little bit of a southern pocket as well. This map incorporates both of those to create a district that's over 50% Latino by citizen voting age population. But we also know now, knowing more than we did at the last presentation, that southern portion of the yellow district goes into a lot of Vietnamese area too. So there might be a decision by some folks of maybe we don't want to have the Latino district be overlapping this really dense Vietnamese population. The data tables for all these maps show the breakdown of the population, and each of these maps shows individual pages for each district. This is draft map B, which again, after having looked at that ethnic breakdown, really shows, okay, now you have a Latino district in that yellow area, majority minority Latino district. The purple district to the north is a majority minority Asian district that is also capturing a lot of the Filipino and Chinese populations, while District 3 to the south is capturing a lot of the Vietnamese population. District 5 is also a majority minority district in this map because it's capturing both to the north and the south of the Latino district, it's capturing heavily Asian populations. And again, we have all the maps in here. And then I just want to finish by showing draft map C. Now, again, a little bit different construction, but you see that you have a northern Asian majority minority district in the purple, the red majority minority Latino district, a green majority minority Asian district there, and then that brown district that kind of hops in along the western side is also a majority minority Asian district, and that district to the south, the yellow one is doesn't have any majority or minority ethnic population. So I'm going to change to be the presenter here so that I can share my screen. I have to find the window that is the right one. Great. And I'm going to show what this looks like. So first off, great. When you come in here, you'll see a little description of how this all works. And if people have questions, there's a little bit more information there. And you can see down here, there are draft maps that have been drawn by the public. And it looks like we've got a few here that are rather new. So that's good to see. Let me just reload this. There we go. That's what I expected to see. So I have gone in to this tool and I've actually put in Districtor that we drew the draft plan A, B, and C already in here so people can open those and start making changes. So your options are either to come in here and create a brand new map where you start from scratch. Let me show you these tools real quick because they're super cool. If you click on the paintbrush, you can click on a color, and you can literally just start painting. It's like super easy. And then you pick another color, and you start painting that district. So it's really kind of easy and fun to do. The other thing that you can do when you're doing this is not only can you can turn on things like the attendance boundaries, or you could turn on something like the Asian citizen voting age population and see the density. You can also zoom in to really see where it is you're drawing and see street names and You know, you can also, what's interesting is they have these little houses. You can see from some of that, like how dense a population is. So you're drawing out here and you're seeing that there's houses here, but this is really just uninhabited area. Even though there's little blocks there, there's not people there. Then there's also this evaluation tab. And this is really kind of important when you're drawing lines because we want to draw these lines. We want to think about communities of interest. We want to think about all those criteria about making the equal population, and we want to make sure that we're drawing districts that are understandable and using major streets or the attendance zones is kind of the backup, but we also don't want to inadvertently dilute the voting power of any protected class based on the Federal Voting Rights Act. You don't come in here with a laser focus on, I need to draw a district that's 55% of this one race. You draw your districts based on what it is that you want to see in a district, how you think they should be shaped, matching the population, the criteria, and then go later and check the ethnic population to make sure that you haven't inadvertently weakened the voting power of a particular ethnic community that might have protections under the Federal Voting Rights Act. And this is a key question I get a lot. They say, Paul, you told me I can't draw districts just based on race, but then you're also talking about how this district's 52.3% Latino and this one's 49.8% Asian. And how can those two be true at the same time? And it is kind of an art. The best description I've heard of how this works is think about driving. Okay, I drove here from Sacramento and I don't want to speed. I don't want to get a ticket. So do I stare at my speedometer the entire time I'm driving down here? Just keep it at 55 and not look at anything else? No, I would crash. Or do I like put a post-it note over my speedometer so I won't look at it and like drive just like I'm the only person on the planet Earth? No, because I'll end up speeding. So you have to kind of do both things a little bit at the same time. You draw your districts, you check that, make sure you're not diluting any voting power, you go back to drawing your districts, and it all can work together as long as you're not making race as the predominant criteria of the drawing of the districts. So let me show you a great way to think about this. You can go in and draw maps from scratch. A lot of fun, go for it, see what you come up with. But you also could go in and say, look, I mean, you could say, I saw that presentation Paul did, and the draft plan B seemed to make some sense because you really do capture not only these Asian, Latino, majority, minority districts, but you also have created a district here, like with this green district, where you're capturing a lot of that Vietnamese population and this bluish green one, and this kind of other green one up here where you capture a lot of the Tagalog language and Mandarin Cantonese language. So you can say, I want to make changes to that map. And so instead of painting from scratch, you can just select your little toolbar, say, well, the thing I don't like about Paul's map is I think that this whole neighborhood here should be in that district. And I think that this neighborhood here should be in this district. You can just move things around. And when you move things around and you click save, you now get to name your map and save it as a new map. It's that simple to take a draft plan and name it as my plan's better than plan B or whatever you want to call it. And this allows you to give input. This is like giving feedback on a map, but in a real functional way. And so if somebody's watching this from home, I would recommend, and we'll do this here in the room, that you try to do some things from scratch or try to do some things by taking an existing map and making it better. And this is an iterative process. So the hope is that the board will see these draft maps, see other public submissions. They might at the next meeting ask lines to be changed, and we might change lines right there at the meeting. But the process will require that before the board actually passes a plan, that it has to be a plan that has been published and unchanged for 7 days. There is one of the things that this protects against is that 20 years ago, the way redistricting worked is the board chair got the, friends of his to go in the back room and draw a map, and they come out to the meeting and pass it. I kid you not, there was a county supervisor's map that was drawn by a Sacramento lobbyist at a bar on a napkin. And it became the county supervisor map in a district near Sacramento. And that doesn't happen anymore. This is a 5-hearing process that's required. We're doing this hearing and other hearings in addition to those required 5 hearings. This is all the map drawings being done in public. And, you know, this creates a real democratized way of doing districting. So what I'm going to do now is I think we're going to end the presentation portion. And those of you at home or watching this online later, please draw maps, submit them. And then those of us in the room, we're just going to let you draw maps, and I'll walk around. And if people have questions or want to ask, you know, something, we can do that. Before we jump into the map drawing, if somebody does have a question, we have a microphone. And if the public that's watching this video you think might be interested in the answer to your question, welcome you to come up and ask that question now. Otherwise, we'll just go into some fun map drawing. Anybody have a question? Can you come up to the microphone? I know you're not shy. Let's turn it on, yeah.
So for the last public hearing, you might receive, let's say, 6 or 9 more map. So what are you going to do? Are you combine them, or you gonna take what the most reasonable in term of geography or in term of population, in term of ethnicity, then you present to the board? You know, I'm still not quite sure. You know, you can ask everyone to, you know, draw the map, but what I say, what it's gonna do for me, so the final decision is still on the board, but we're gonna pick the last 3 or the most appropriate one or the most reasoning, you know, map that the committee look, you know, all of those aspect, all of those factor. So I'm kind of, you know, curious about how we do that.
Yeah. So it's the board's decision which final map they want to adopt. The way that we do this process is we want to first open up the process to as many public maps as we can get. The first 3 draft maps were our attempt to kind of take the best elements of maps that we felt were legally adoptable and to give them to the board as draft maps A, B, and C. Just kind of here's some starting points. Now, hopefully we'll get some drawn maps here tonight, and some other people who are watching at home draw some maps. And you might even see like a few people get together and send in a letter to the board and say, we drew draft map, best map ever is what it's called, and we want the board to pass that map. And somebody else might submit a map, or a few other people might submit a map, or even like the Teachers Association or the Parent Teachers Association might submit a map, and they might send an email in and says, our map's the equity map, or we want this map drawn. At the next hearing, I believe the board will have the 3 public maps, more than a dozen, or the 3 draft maps, more than a dozen public maps. And the board will be able to look at those maps, talk about what they like or don't like about different maps. They could even, as a group, at the next hearing on Zoom, so everybody can see it, have me live line draw a new map, incorporating the things that they like in different maps. And the idea at the next meeting is to take all these maps and try to hone in on maybe one draft map that they're really thinking about. So at the next hearing, the 5th hearing, which is still to be decided that date, but it'll be sometime in August, then they can adopt a final map based on what was done at the prior hearing. So it is a process right now of taking in information. And what generally happens is, like at the next hearing, maybe the board says, none of us like map A, right? Okay, good. None of us like map C, right? No. All of us like this new map 300-256, right? Okay. So between 300-256 and draft map B, what do we like about those two maps? Which map do we like the most? Which map has the votes to get passed? And you kind of come to a conclusion of, well, we think we want to move forward to the next hearing with 300-256 as our draft map. And we name that draft map D. We kind of move A, B, and C off of being considered, and draft map D is the one that goes for the final vote. Now, if the board doesn't vote on that at the next meeting, then they would have to have another hearing for another map that's been public for 7 days. But it, it's a process that we'll help through. But at no point am I going to come in and say, this is the map that has to be adopted or anything like that. The only kind of guardrails that I'll provide will be if somebody submits a map and they have 20% deviations between the largest and smallest districts, I'll tell the board that's not a legal map. If they draw districts that dilute the voting power of the different ethnic communities in a way that could be potentially a fair maps or a Federal Voting Rights Act concern, I'll raise that concern, but it'll be your attorneys that really are the deciding factor on that. And that will kind of help us move forward. My sharing's turned off, right? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, come on up.
I appreciate the complexity of the task at hand, your software and your expertise to increase the level of democracy of representation of our student population as relate to us. So I have a little short statement that I feel is tangential to the topic, and it may be of use. So I'm going to read that, if I may. So my name is Mehdi Panahi, and I'm a proud teacher in this district for 20 years. Tonight, I'm speaking not just as an educator, but as someone who loves this community a lot and hopes for its improvement in whatever way. Now, one of the hardest truths I've learned in my 20 years, both in the classroom and in life, is this. When we stop sharing in the lives of others, we start to lose something essential. We lose empathy. It's true that even we redraw the maps for a group of population and ethnic representation, multiple criteria, but even within election, within those criteria, there might be some additional criteria that we may not have considered. So I experienced this firsthand. When I became, 10 years ago, after 10 years in the classroom, I became a coach, instructional coach. Within matter of months, I start to lose something. I got a new perspective of looking from the outside in, but I forgot what it was like to be a teacher. Just after a few months of having been a teacher for 10 years. So I forgot what it meant to stand in front of like 30-something students with limited resources, unlimited needs, the exhaustion, the hope, the pressure, the quiet victories that the teachers experience. It wasn't that I didn't care anymore, but I had drifted. And what that distance came, a loss of understanding. And if that can happen to me, someone who can live both sides, imagine what happens when people making the biggest decisions for the district, for our schools, have never lived our reality at all. And that applies to our administrators at all. If they're outside the classroom for too long, they lose that essential element. So too often our school boards are filled with individuals who come very, very different worlds than their students, parents, and teachers. They may be kind, intelligent, well-meaning, but empathy can't survive on good intentions alone. Without the lived experience, without that shared struggle, it becomes easy to overlook the very thing that matters the most. We cannot continue to elect boards that are shaped by privilege, by who has the money to campaign, the time to attend meetings, or the connections to get a foot in the door. Because when we do, we build a system that speaks about working class families, educators, and students, but not with them. And I don't know how redrawing the map is going to address those issues. And when we do that, we have failed our students. We need change. This is a great step toward it. But I feel not a symbolic change. We need real change that translates to people on the board that understand those struggles. So I'm calling on this board and our broader community to reimagine who gets to serve. Let's create policies that make space for working parents, for hourly wage earners, for teachers still in the classroom. They can be on board. Let's remove the barriers that keep everybody people. I mean, this is at the national level. We have a Congress filled with millionaires who don't care about us. None of them do. They don't care because it's the nature of human. They may be good people, but obviously they don't care about their constituents. Representation isn't about filling a seat, it's about giving voice to the people who know what it means to stretch a paycheck, to work a double shift, to teach on a Friday afternoon when your heart is breaking, but your kids still need you. If we want a school board that leads with compassion, we must build a board that has walked the same roads as the people it serves. Thank you truly for listening and your commitment to creating a school system that sees everyone. Thank you.
Very well said. Thank you. I do want to address that just real briefly because I think some people get this question of why are we even doing this? Why are we drawing districts? Like, what's the purpose? And I don't want to speak specifically to this geography, so I'll just talk about another city, a city down in Southern California that was talked about a lot during the districting, when this law was passed. Anaheim. We all know Anaheim because we've probably all been to Disneyland once, right? And Anaheim has incredible diversity. If you've been to Anaheim, you have Disneyland. You have all the Disneyland workers that live in low-income communities. You have a history there of Japanese populations that were sent to internment camps who used to be farms. It used to be like strawberry farms down there right along, right in the middle of Anaheim. And you have a lot of what we see in Anaheim when we go to Disneyland or when we're on those major streets and when we're going around. That is what we see as the community of Anaheim. And the community of Anaheim has a city council. And every year they elect a city council at large elections in a really big city of Anaheim. And how many people that got elected to that city council were from that area? 0. Every council member lived in the Anaheim Hills. Every council member had the money to run for office, the connections, they're friends with the editor of the newspaper, they are president of the Democratic Club or the Republican Club. They have access because of their affluence. And the community that was being most impacted by the laws passed by the city council were the ones who were working in the hotel industry and the service industry, who were lower income, who were renters, and they were being governed by, literally, my joke was that you could run a 5K around the rich homes of all 5 of the council members of the Anaheim City Council. And like you were saying, what empathy, even if they went to run for city council for the right reasons, even if they felt a connection because they grew up in the area and they are friends with these communities, the loss of empathy over years of fundraisers and, toasting champagne at the country club with your friends can distance your empathy from the communities that you're serving. And whether it was Anaheim, West Covina, same thing, the people who were being governed in the more urban part of West Covina were being governed by the people who lived in the hillsides above West Covina. And this was true all around the state. And that's one of the reasons the California Voting Rights Act was passed, was to try to require a geographic diversity of the people serving and to give opportunity to people who had never been able to run for those boards before because they didn't have access to power, they didn't have access to fundraising, elections were too expensive to run citywide or whatever, and this gave an opportunity. City of Woodland had their districting, and one of the council members said, why are we drawing a district south of Main Street? Nobody ever runs from south of Main Street, where the Latino population was. When I heard that, I wasn't doing the districting, but I called up the attorney for that redistricting. And I was like, this is insane. The reason nobody runs south of Main Street is because they're not idiots. Because nobody's ever gotten elected there. Nobody there's a member of the Democratic or Republican clubs. Nobody there knows how to fundraise because they're not part of the political infrastructure. And that's why people south of Main Street don't run, is because why would they? But once districts were drawn, the first election, nobody ran. The second election, well, the first election, nobody ran, so they had to appoint somebody. That person who got appointed helped create political infrastructure. And then the next election, somebody ran from there. The next election, 3 people ran from there. And they created the political networks in order to create an opportunity for those people to represent the area as in a district election system that they didn't have in an at-large election system. So I don't want to just proselytize about the California Voting Rights Act. I do think it's a good law. And I don't want to necessarily make the analogies to your district in particular because I don't know where the incumbents live. And I don't want to like say that the board isn't doing an excellent job. I just want to talk about the history of why the law was created. And it's because of what the issues that you raise. This is one tool, right? There's a lot of other potential tools to improve local governance, but this is one tool and it's been impactful throughout the state. There's hundreds of agencies that have converted from elections at large to districts. One of them, the first one I ever did, was College of the Desert. And I went to the College of the Desert board meeting, and not to insult anybody here or watching, but it was 570-year-old plus white board members that had been on the board for 30 plus years at College of the Desert, which is a very Latino area, Coachella Valley. And now I go on the website and look at who's on the board, and it's like younger, more representative, and it's a positive change in that governance. And that's true. That's multiplied throughout the state. Now, whether or not that tool that they created to address Anaheim, West Covina, Escondido, other cities or counties, even San Mateo County was at large before, whether that tool is properly being applied in an area here, I don't know. There are some discussions about the inability to create 2 majority minority Latino districts. So we might walk out of this process and feel like the voting power has been strengthened for Latinos in one part of the area, but it might be weakened in other ways. And that's a byproduct of the federal law that we don't really have the tool to fix. So I don't want to say that just because it's the tool that was created for these other agencies that's perfectly being applied here, but we do have the law and we're trying to implement it the best way we can. Sorry for the long extra speech, but I drove a long way, so Any other questions? If not, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put down the mic. We can stop the recording and people at home draw, submit maps, and I'll just walk around if people want to ask any questions or, go on the website. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead and you can ask a question. You get turn it, pull the switch. You had your finger on the switch.
Is there a way to see the common interests of the groups instead of just seeing like the racial majority of it?
So on the tool, you're able to see ethnic populations and the attendance areas. The rest of it, for purposes of drawing, I mean, we could bring back up those maps that show renter, homeowner, and income so that you could look at those as well. But a lot of it is what you know about the community. It's about your lived experience, to borrow a term that was said earlier, of what you see as being your area and to draw using kind of our best instincts. Yeah. Oh, one more question.
More of a comment, especially to the gentleman here. What is your name, sir? Mehdi? Are you a teacher here? Have you Independence? My name is at Overfelt. That's my alma mater. My name is Manuel. First initials J Manuel Herrera, and I'm a member of the school board, and I've been attending these meetings. And I really am moved by the vision that you see possible. And I do want to explain that we have, I think, an unusual board right now, composed of 3 women, 2 men, 2 Vietnamese, 2 Latinos, 1, she likes to joke, otherwise known as a European Caucasian white, which is about as demographically on target of a demographic for 5 members of a board as you can come up with, given the diversity of this area. Now, I've been saying this pretty much at every meeting because it distresses me so much. Purportedly, we are being compelled to do this process of districting because, again, allegedly, purportedly, There is racially polarized voting in this district. It's got the thinnest of evidence, and last time I made this comment, you said, I could get into it, but, and I understood, maybe just one-on-one, we can get into it
Yeah,
because
but
I
we can do
remain,
it public,
yeah,
rather than we don't, yeah,
you
we
know,
don't do one-on-one.
I remain a severe skeptic of the so-called evidence of racially polarized voting in this district. And nevertheless, I think it's time for us to have district elections because it's more accessible for people to be able to run. But I'm distressed with the way this is going, given all the provisions of the law and what have you. In our last meeting, this gentleman explained to us that based on all the input that was received, there was 3 maps that were generated, map A, map B, map C. And it seems, in terms of where we are right now, it seems that that is yielding 3 Asian predominant districts, 1 Latino predominant district. And that if you try to tinker with that, to have 2 dominant Latino districts, it won't work. And he was trying to explain the particulars last time of why it won't work. So where we're headed right now is maps that create 3 Asian predominant districts, 1 Latino that isn't even that dominant. And what's the 5th one? Is it just generally
Other.
other, just other, which continues to distress me. I don't, so here we go. When we finally, the board cannot do anything with this process. We can observe, we can witness, we can be a part of asking questions, but the board has no direct role in generating maps or changes or anything other until the final product reaches the board. And at that point, we can deliberate in terms of what's before us. But yeah, this is a cohesive community. It really is. And this board, I know them and I've worked with them for years, so I can tell you, they're in terms of empathy, just the feeling for this community and our kids and our families and what happens in our classroom, you're not going to find a board that is more attuned, heart, soul, and mind, with our classroom. One of our board members, Lorena Chavez, is a former classroom teacher and principal, and the other board member is a substitute teacher. She wanted to have an experience of what it is to teach in the classroom, so she went, got her credential, and she serves as a substitute. She's taught in many classes, not at 2 of the 5 board members. The rest of us, I'm a graduate of Overfelt High School, in the last century, a long time ago. The feeling that I have, because we came here in 1952 when it was orchards and fields and canneries. I have photos of me and my family picking prunes at Berryessa and Capitol. So it matters. It just matters to all of us. Every board member, you're not going to. I have my board colleague here, Van Ley, and talk about dedication. Talk about connection with community. We have an amazing board. We have an amazing community. And here comes the California Voting Rights Act to disrupt it, presumably to make it all better. We'll see.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or? Oh, do we have somebody else with a question? Well, yeah. I think it's on.
It's not okay.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. So I'm really new to this process. I
Mhm.
just attended my first meeting last time. But my question is really related to, earlier, I think, the gentleman in our board member brought up is that if we continue to not be able to have a map that has that equitable, ratio, then what's the next step? So that's my first part. My second part is, it seems like there's
some rules about having the majority minority? Like, is that a must that there has to be a majority minority, or can we create areas that are sort of without any minority or majority minority?
So, so first off, there are two different things. There's the ratio of the ethnic composition of the board members, and then there's the ethnic composition of the districts. And just because a district is other, not a majority minority, Latino or Asian, doesn't mean that it's going to elect a white person. It could elect a Latino or an Asian. Any of the districts that are majority minority Asian, there might be a Latino candidate that goes and runs, maybe even one of the incumbent board members, and is supported by the Asian community and by the Latino community and wins overwhelmingly, because it's about the power of those communities in those districts to elect their candidate of choice. It's not about trying to conceive of the ethnic population that's going to be serving on the board, because Gavin Newsom got huge votes from the Latino community, and other candidates who are Latino might not get the votes of the Latino community. So you have this two different sides of it. And in terms of composition, remember, the citizen voting age population Latino is 29%. So, and the Asian citizen voting age population is 47% district-wide. The fact that the Latino population is so much more densely concentrated in the area that I showed on that heat map really means that when you draw a district in that area, it's real easy to draw a district that's majority minority Latino. The way the Federal Voting Rights Act works is that, let's just do the historical lesson, essentially. A lot of this was based on Federal Voting Rights Act issues in like Alabama with black populations. And you would have a black population, and somebody would come in and district it, and they say, great, there's this black population. You know what? We all care so deeply about the black population. So we're going to draw our 8 districts, and every one of those 8 districts is going to be 12% black. And they slice up the black population into multiple districts in a way that is called cracking. It's taking that area that should have a black representative, or maybe even has enough population for 2 or 3 black representatives, and divides it up in a way so that there's no black representatives or no area wherein the black community is able to elect a candidate of choice. So that's called cracking. Then the courts came in and said, you can't do that. So the people who drew the lines the next election cycle said, fine, we won't do that. And so it was Georgia, I think it was, they went in and they took the black community and they went neighborhood by neighborhood, and they shoved as many black population into one district, made a 90% black district, and said, there you go, that's Julian Bond's district. And Julian Bond was my professor in college. He was drawn into a district that was purposefully created to be the one, you get one black majority. It was a 99% black district, and I'm exaggerating, but it was a massively black district. So that was called packing. And that became illegal later. So you can't crack or pack. The fear from the line drawing process in general is that if you have a dense population of one minority group and you're to draw it so that you're kind of splitting that minority group into multiple districts, you're kind of dooming that community into a set of districts where they're never going to be able to be the dominant voting power in that district. It would be very hard for them to elect a candidate of choice. And so when we look at that one Latino area, it kind of preordains that we should draw districts that maximize the voting power. Now, if you could draw 2 Latino districts that were majority minority here, and we created one 70% Latino district instead, that would be illegal because it would be packing. Just the same, if we can draw, a member of the public drew a map that was almost 55% Latino CVAP. If we come back and we draw 2 districts that are 43% CVAP Latino, that would be considered cracking, because we'd be drawing districts wherein that Latino community that could have had a strong foothold in one district now has maybe no foothold in either district. And so from a federal voting rights standpoint, a layperson way of thinking about it is that if it can be drawn majority minority, following the normal rules, drawing districts that are equal population, are compact, are easily understood by voters, meeting these other criteria, and you don't draw it, then you have to have a really good reason not to draw it. Now, what is a legitimate, really good reason? Let's say the only way to draw the district would be to create a district that dove around the entire agency, where you're connecting the district by rivers and streams and no actual real community at all. It's just like a complete gerrymander. You draw a district that looks like a snake going all through the district. Just to get a 50% Latino majority minority district, that probably wouldn't be legal or required. But when you can draw one that's compact, like the one that's on any of these 3 draft maps, I'm not the attorney, but it would be really hard if there was ever a court case to tell a judge why you didn't draw that district. So,
And the California Voting Rights Act is based on the federal.
California Voting Rights Act first says follow the Federal Voting Rights Act. The first line of the California Voting Rights Act is districts shall comply with the Federal Voting Rights Act. And the Federal Voting Rights Act sets out all these criteria. There's a great piece that explains all this Federal Voting Rights Act issue with the Brennan Center put together a great big document, and it's fluid. We might have a Supreme Court that 2 weeks from now invalidates the Federal Voting Rights Act entirely. We don't know. But for right now, that's the law.
It doesn't seem like it's very applicable to, I don't know about all areas of California, but especially in our region, because as you've demonstrated in the maps, right, our diversity is different pockets, right? It's very different from, say, as you exampled about Alabama or Georgia, where there's dense populations of one ethnic group. And so it just makes it really difficult to apply that to our situation. My concern is really, I think another gentleman in a previous meeting brought up that, it seems like, yes, the majority population is Asian and Latino, but we're really not, we have to really consider the populations that are less, right? Because they make up a voice, the less percentage of the population, like we were talking about Blacks or, South Asian or Native American, those I feel like are sometimes very disenfranchised groups that we don't take into consideration when we think about just majority of Asian and Latinos.
There are other election laws that address those issues more effectively because, let's say, as an example, the Chaldean population or the Armenian population in other cities where you can't draw a district that is going to be majority Chaldean or majority Asian, but you can make sure that they're providing language, ballot materials that are in Armenian, or language ballot materials that are in different languages, or ensuring that there's requiring that counties do outreach to these different communities, or even investigating voter rolls, whether or not people of different ethnic groups are more likely to get kicked off the voter rolls. There's a lot of things in the Federal Voting Rights Act that are more effective at addressing the issue of a small population. Districting, it's really hard to address the issues of a smaller population because like we have all the districts right now are 3% Black population. If we drew a district that was 3.5% Black, would that make it more effective as a Black district? It would be very unlikely to do that. But you can look within the drawing process at other things like renters or income. You might see that, okay, that eastern side of the district, that is a very affluent district portion. So I don't want to take the very heavily renter district and have it go all the way out to the very affluent area. I want to have the area that's more renter district to incorporate more renters so that lower income families have a stronger voice in that district,
So we are able to overlay the socioeconomic layers today,
Those
tonight?
those images show the socioeconomic layers, but in the districtor tool, we can't just like turn on everything. So the one that's in the district tools are the ethnic and the attendance zones, but we could always bring those maps back up so you could look.
To consult.
Yeah,
Okay,
to look
that's
side by
great.
side. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Did I say something that scratched your itch?
Yes, you made the valid point that although a district may be predominantly of one racial ethnic group or another, it doesn't necessarily translate into only that ethnicity or racial part of the community. being the ones elected, that, you know, others can be elected as well within
Mhm.
a Asian predominant district or a Latino predominant district. As candidates arise and as relationships are formed, people elect who they see as, who they see and support, who they trust. And that's a totally valid point. I just want to make the observation that the Asian community, particularly the Vietnamese community, has emerged over the last 10, 15 years as a powerhouse sector of voters. They support their candidates, you know, and it's been very impressive and remains impressive that where there's a predominance of Asian, mostly Vietnamese voters, that they line up behind their candidates and Vietnamese names on the ballot and so on. So although what you observe is valid, the probability is 50-50 at best, you know?
Yeah.
So
So-
that's, go ahead.
With all respect,
Uh-huh.
after we're done here, because just so folks know, I don't do one-on-one discussions with board members, so we can have this conversation in public, but we can't just sidebar because I don't interact with clients in a way where there could be anybody could think, oh, look, Paul and the trustee are over in the corner gossiping.
Yeah.
We don't do that. So just to keep in the public zone. At the last meeting, you said you didn't believe there was racially polarized voting.
Yeah, that's correct.
You just explained racially polarized voting, though, because you said that the Vietnamese voters vote
In an
line up.
at-large district, but in.
That's the thing to think about, is that the nature of ethnic groups kind of backing a candidate, whether they're backing a candidate with money or with endorsements and
Yeah.
volunteers and walkers,
Yeah.
and ultimately with votes.
Uh-huh.
When the demographer who did the study that prompted Shankman to do this letter, he said, we did a racially polarized studying and found that voters district-wide were racially polarized in prior races. They were looking at that exact same thing. It doesn't have to be a pejorative to say racially polarized, because in some cases, a community who feels their issues aren't going to be addressed any other way, they work together to elect a candidate. And that can be counter to other ethnic populations working together to back another candidate.
Okay.
And so that's the idea of racially polarized voting, is
Okay.
that
Well, two things. One is, again, the composition of the current board.
I
Perfectly-
understand that, yeah.
Okay, and the other is, the only thing I've heard to support racially polarized voting in this school district. My other observations had to do with city council races
Mhm.
and, you know, state legislative races, the patterns that show up
Yeah.
there. But the only thing I've heard that supports racially polarized voting in the East Side Union High School District is that, I mean, it's just public knowledge, Patricia Martinez Roach ran several times and was unable to get elected. And it was a pattern over 10, 15 years, or I don't know the period of time. And I said, well, are they aware that she actually served on this board for many years before? And she fell out of favor because of news stories and opinion editorials from, you know, working against her. And at one point, she lost an election. And then she has tried repeatedly to be reelected onto this board and has not succeeded. And she's been a perennial candidate for state legislative offices and for city council races and has been unable to get elected. So if that is part of the evidence for racially polarized voting, I just don't see it.
So in the racially polarized voting, there's also, there's endogenous elections, which are the elections of the board, and exogenous elections, which are the elections for other things that are within the footprint of the board area.
Okay.
So you could actually look at an election for US Senate,
Uh-huh.
right? And you could say, oh my gosh, in the US Senate race in this area, the southern portion voted for Katie Porter, the Latino population voted for Barbara Lee,
Uh-huh.
and the Asian population voted for Adam Schiff.
Uh-huh.
That would be racially polarized voting. That could be sufficient to say that the school board, even though we're not talking about school board races, we're talking about an exogenous election. That could be evidence that could be used to say that this school board should be in districts.
Yeah, maybe at some point I'll just spend the
After this
time-
is all over, we'll
Yeah,
have coffee.
I'd like to, get into all of this evidence.
Absolutely.
That's the first time I hear that term.
Yeah, of course.
exogenous,
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
Any other questions? Oh, we have questions regarding the mapping tool? Yeah, so what I'll do is if we don't have any more questions, this has probably been entertaining for somebody sitting at home watching this on YouTube afterwards. I'll put down the microphone, we'll stop the recording, and if people have one-on-one questions to go over maps, we can do that. And that's it. I think that concludes the presentation. So thank you very much.